The dust swirled through the doorway of the First National Bank of Laramie, Wyoming Territory, as Natalie Jefferson pushed through the heavy oak door, her worn boots clicking against the polished floor with each determined step. The year was 1878, and Natalie had spent the last 3 days riding from her family's struggling ranch 15 miles outside town, rehearsing what she would say to convince the banker to extend her loan. Her father had died 6 months ago from pneumonia, leaving her and her younger brother Samuel to manage 200 acres and 30 head of cattle with debts mounting higher than the Medicine Bow Mountains in the distance. The bank's interior smelled of cigar smoke and old money. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, and brass fixtures gleamed in the afternoon light filtering through tall windows. Behind an imposing desk sat Harold Pemberton, the head banker, a portly man in his 50s with slicked-back hair and a gold watch chain stretched across his considerable belly. He barely glanced up when Natalie approached, his pen continuing to scratch across a ledger. "Mr. Pemberton," Natalie began, straightening her shoulders and trying to sound more confident than she felt, "I appreciate you taking the time to see me today." The banker finally looked up, his eyes scanning her threadbare dress and the mud stains on her hem with obvious distaste. "Miss Jefferson, I already know why you are here, and I am afraid the answer remains unchanged from your letter last month." Natalie's hands tightened around the papers she carried, her father's will and the deed to their property. "Sir, if you would just look at these figures again. We had a hard winter, but the cattle that survived are strong. With just 3 more months, we can sell them at market in Cheyenne. The prices are good this year. I only need an extension on the loan payment until autumn." Pemberton leaned back in his leather chair, which creaked under his weight. "Miss Jefferson, your father, God rest his soul, was already behind on payments before he passed. The bank has been more than generous in allowing you these additional months. But facts are facts. You are a woman trying to run a cattle ranch. You have no husband, no men to handle the work properly. It is simply not feasible." Heat rose to Natalie's cheeks, though she fought to keep her voice steady. "I have been managing just fine, sir. Samuel is 17 now, nearly a man grown. We have kept the stock alive through one of the worst winters on record. We deserve a chance to prove ourselves." The banker's expression shifted from dismissive to something approaching amusement. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "My dear girl, I admire your spirit, truly I do, but spirit does not pay debts. The bank cannot continue extending credit based on optimism and a young woman's pluck. I have shareholders to answer to, business considerations you could not possibly understand." "I understand perfectly well," Natalie said, her voice rising despite her best efforts. "I understand that you have been buying up properties from families who fall on hard times, reselling them to your friends from back east at triple the price. I understand that you would rather see me fail than give me the same consideration you gave John Hendricks last year when his herd caught fever." Pemberton's face darkened, his smile vanishing. He stood abruptly, placing his palms flat on the desk. "Miss Jefferson, I suggest you watch your tongue. Mr. Hendricks is a man with years of experience and connections throughout the territory. He was a sound investment. You are neither sound nor, frankly, capable of managing the responsibility your father left you. My final answer is no. The bank will not extend your loan. You have until the end of the month to settle your accounts, or we will be forced to foreclose on the property." Natalie felt the room tilt slightly, her worst fears crystallizing into reality. "That is 3 weeks away. I cannot possibly gather the full amount in 3 weeks. Then I suggest you find a husband quickly or resign yourself to finding other accommodations." Pemberton sat back down, picking up his pen as though the matter was settled. "Good day, Miss Jefferson. Please," Natalie said, hating the desperation that crept into her voice. "I am begging you. Just until autumn. I will pay interest, whatever you require. My father banked with you for 15 years. Does that loyalty mean nothing?" Pemberton actually laughed then, a sharp bark of sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "Loyalty. My dear girl, this is business, not a charity house for stubborn women playing at ranching. I have wasted enough time on this conversation. Good day." The dismissal was absolute. Natalie stood frozen, unable to believe this was truly happening. She had known it would be difficult, but she had not expected such casual cruelty, such obvious enjoyment of her predicament. The bank's door opened behind her, letting in a gust of Wyoming wind. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor, and Natalie became aware of a presence beside her, someone tall enough that she had to look up to see his face. The man who had entered was unlike anyone she had seen in Laramie before. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the space around him. Long dark hair, nearly black, fell past his collar, tied back with a leather cord. His face was weathered and tanned from years in the sun, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale gray like storm clouds, currently fixed on the banker with an intensity that made Pemberton shift uncomfortably in his seat. The man wore buckskin trousers and a heavy shirt that did nothing to hide the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. A hunting knife hung at his belt, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone equally at home in civilized spaces and the wild country beyond town limits. "Xavier Everett," Pemberton said, his tone markedly different, almost nervous. "I was not expecting you until Thursday." The mountain man, Xavier, did not acknowledge the banker's greeting immediately. Instead, he looked at Natalie, and something in his expression softened slightly. "Madam, are you all right?" Natalie realized tears were threatening at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "I am fine, thank you." "She does not sound fine," Xavier said, turning his attention back to Pemberton. "What is happening here, Harold?" The banker waved his hand dismissively. "Just business matters, nothing that concerns you. The lady was just leaving." "I heard you laughing," Xavier said, his voice quiet but carrying a note of danger. "At her?" Pemberton's face reddened. "Mr. Everett, I appreciate that you do considerable business with this bank, but my dealings with other customers are not your concern." Xavier remained perfectly still, but somehow his presence seemed to grow larger, more imposing. "When I walk into a bank and hear a man laughing at a woman who is clearly in distress, I make it my concern. Now, what is her situation?" "Xavier, really, this is not necessary," Pemberton tried again, but Xavier simply looked at him until the banker's words trailed off. "Fine. Miss Jefferson's father died and left her with a failing ranch and considerable debt. She came seeking an extension on her loan, which I have rightly refused as the property and borrower represent a poor risk. That is all." "How much does she owe?" Xavier asked. "I fail to see how that is relevant to you." "How much?" Pemberton sighed heavily. $800. The property itself is worth perhaps $1,200 at current market rates if one could find a buyer. The cattle are barely worth mentioning at this point." Xavier turned to Natalie. "Is that accurate?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. She had no idea who this man was, or why he was involving himself in her troubles, but something about him made her feel simultaneously safer and more aware of herself than she could remember feeling in a long time. "What would you need to make the ranch profitable?" Xavier asked her directly. Natalie found her voice. "Time, mostly. The cattle just need to fatten up for another 3 months. Prices are strong in Cheyenne right now. If I could sell them at peak weight, I would clear enough to pay the debt and have operating capital for next year. What is stopping you? The bank is calling the loan due at the end of this month. I will have to sell everything immediately just to pay what I owe, assuming I can even find buyers that quickly. I will have nothing left to start over. Xavier nodded slowly, then looked back at Pemberton. I will pay her debt. In full. Today. The banker's mouth fell open. What? You heard me. $800. I want you to mark her loan as satisfied and provide her with a paid receipt. Now. Natalie gasped. Sir, I cannot possibly accept such a thing. I do not even know you. Xavier's pale eyes found hers again, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Not pity, which she would have hated, but recognition. As if he saw in her something familiar, something worth protecting. Consider it an investment. You can pay me back after your cattle sell. I cannot, Natalie protested. I have no collateral to offer you, no guarantee. Why would you do this for a stranger? Because I know what it is like to need help and have everyone turn their back, Xavier said simply. And because Harold here needs to remember that money is not the only measure of worth in this world. Pemberton had recovered from his shock and was shaking his head. Mr. Everett, while I appreciate your business, I must advise against this. You are throwing away good money on a bad prospect. Did I ask for your advice? Xavier's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. You manage my investments well enough, Harold, but do not presume to tell me how to spend my own money. Now, shall we handle this transaction, or do I need to move my accounts to the bank in Cheyenne? The threat hung in the air. Natalie could see the conflict on Pemberton's face. Whatever business Xavier had with the bank must be substantial if such a threat carried weight. Finally, the banker pulled out a new ledger and began writing with sharp, angry strokes. Very well. $800 to satisfy the Jefferson loan in full. I assume you want this in cash transfer. I do. And I want to see you write the receipt for Miss Jefferson showing zero balance owed, effective immediately. The process took 20 minutes, during which Natalie stood in a state of shock. This strange mountain man had just paid off her debt without knowing her name until Pemberton mentioned it. She watched as Xavier signed papers, counted out gold coins from a leather pouch he produced from his saddlebag, and verified every detail of the transaction with the careful attention of someone who understood business, despite his wild appearance. When it was finished, Pemberton thrust 2 documents across the desk, one for Xavier, showing his payment, and one for Natalie, showing her ranch was clear of all encumbrances to the First National Bank. There, the banker said coldly. I hope you are satisfied, both of you. Not quite, Xavier said. Harold, I think you owe Miss Jefferson an apology. I most certainly do not. Xavier leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk, his muscular frame towering over the seated banker. You laughed at her. A woman who lost her father, who is trying her best to honor his memory and keep her home. You laughed at her pain. That requires an apology. Pemberton's face cycled through several shades of red and purple. Finally, through gritted teeth, he said, My apologies, Miss Jefferson, if I offended you. It was not sincere, but Natalie found she no longer cared. She had her receipt, her ranch was saved, and the man who had made it possible was already heading for the door. She grabbed her papers and hurried after him. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright after the dimness of the bank. Xavier had already reached his horse, a massive black stallion that suited him perfectly. He was checking the saddle when Natalie caught up to him. Wait, please, she called. He turned, and in the full daylight she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 at most. Scars marked his hands and a thin white line ran along his jaw, evidence of a hard life. But his eyes, Those storm-gray eyes held intelligence and something else she could not quite name. "Mr. Everett, I do not know how to thank you," she began. "No thanks needed. You would have done the same for someone else if you could. You do not know that. You do not know me at all." A slight smile touched his lips, the first she had seen from him. "I know you well enough. You are brave enough to stand up to Harold Pemberton. You are determined enough to try running a ranch alone. That tells me everything I need to know." "How will I repay you?" Natalie asked. $800 is a fortune. Even with a good cattle sale, it will take me time." "I am not worried about it. Pay me when you can. But where do I find you? How do I contact you?" Xavier swung up into his saddle with easy grace, sitting astride the powerful horse as though born there. "I have a place up in the mountains about 30 miles north of here. A trapping cabin near Laramie Peak. Anyone in town can give you directions. But there is no rush, Miss Jefferson, truly." "At least tell me why," Natalie pressed. "Why would you do this for me?" He looked down at her, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. "Maybe I saw someone worth helping. Maybe I am tired of men like Pemberton deciding who deserves a chance and who does not. Or maybe I just wanted to." With that, he turned his horse and rode down the main street of Laramie, leaving Natalie standing outside the bank with her precious receipt clutched in her hand, and more questions than answers filling her mind. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of hard work. Natalie returned to the ranch and told Samuel everything that had happened. Her brother, tall and lanky at 17 with their father's brown eyes, was amazed and suspicious in equal measure. "Some stranger just paid off our debt," he asked, helping her mend a fence line. "Nat, that does not make sense. Nobody does something like that without wanting something in return." "He said I could pay him back after the cattle sell," Natalie replied, hammering a nail into the fence post with more force than necessary. "He did not ask for anything else." "Then he is either a saint or a fool, and I do not believe in either." Samuel secured the barbed wire they had been stringing. Did he at least seem trustworthy? Natalie paused in her work, thinking about Xavier's face, his calm authority in the bank, the way he had stood up for her without hesitation. "Yes," she said finally. "I think he is." "You have thought about him a lot," Samuel observed with the irritating insight of younger siblings. "Since you got back." "I have not," Natalie lied, but she could feel heat rising to her face. The truth was she had thought about Xavier constantly. The memory of his presence, the sound of his voice, the way he had looked at her as though she was someone worth defending. It had awakened something in her that she thought had died along with her father, some part of her that could feel something beyond exhaustion and worry. "Whatever you say," Samuel grinned. "But if this mountain man shows up here, I want to meet him properly. Make sure he knows you have family who will look after you. I can look after myself. I know you can, but it does not hurt to have backup." They worked until sunset, checking on the cattle, repairing equipment, doing the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. Natalie fell into bed exhausted each night, but sleep came slowly. She kept replaying that scene in the bank, kept wondering about the man who lived alone in the mountains and had enough gold to pay a stranger's debts on impulse. 3 weeks after her encounter at the bank, Natalie was in the barn mucking out stalls when she heard Samuel call her name with unusual urgency. She dropped the pitchfork and hurried outside, expecting trouble. Instead, she found Xavier Everett sitting atop his black stallion in their ranch yard, looking around with the assessing gaze of someone who knew livestock and land. He wore different clothes than before, but still the practical buckskins and homespun of someone who spent most of his time away from civilization. His long hair was tied back, and in the morning sunlight, Natalie could see threads of copper running through the dark brown. "Mr. Everett," she said, suddenly aware of how she must look, covered in hay and dirt from the barn work. "I was not expecting you." "I should have sent word," he said, dismounting in that smooth, powerful way he had. "I was heading into Laramie for supplies and thought I would check on how you were managing." Samuel appeared from the side of the house, wiping his hands on a rag and studying Xavier with open curiosity. "You are the mountain man." "Samuel, mind your manners," Natalie said quickly. "Mr. Everett, this is my brother Samuel." Xavier extended his hand, which Samuel shook after a moment's hesitation. "Your sister speaks highly of you. She says you have been invaluable in keeping this place running." Samuel's suspicion visibly decreased at the compliment. "We are managing well enough. Better now that the debt is cleared. We owe you a great deal, sir." "Just helping where I can," Xavier said. He looked past them at the ranch buildings, the pastures beyond. "Your stock looks healthy." "Better than I expected given what Harold said about your losses last winter." "We lost about a third of the herd," Natalie admitted. "But the ones that survived are strong, and we have had good grass this spring. They have been putting on weight." Xavier nodded, then looked back at her with those unsettling gray eyes. "Would you mind showing me around? I would like to see your operation." It was not really a question, and Natalie found herself agreeing. They walked the property together, Samuel trailing behind initially, but eventually excusing himself to work on repairing a water trough. Natalie showed Xavier the main herd grazing in the southern pasture, pointed out the irrigation system her father had built to bring creek water to the home fields, explained their plans for the cattle sale in autumn. Xavier listened carefully, asked intelligent questions, and occasionally offered observations that showed he understood ranching far better than his mountain man appearance suggested. As they walked, Natalie found herself relaxing, talking more freely than she had with anyone since her father's death. "You have a good setup here," Xavier said as they stood on a rise overlooking the ranch. "Your father built something solid. With decent prices at market, you should clear your debt to me and have plenty left over for next year." "About that," Natalie said, "I have been trying to calculate what I owe you, not just the 800 but interest. What would be fair? I am not concerned about interest." "But you should be. That is how loans work. If I were borrowing from the bank, I would pay interest. I should pay you the same." Xavier turned to face her, and standing this close, she was struck again by his sheer size, the way his presence seemed to fill the space around him. "Natalie," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I did not help you to make a profit. I helped you because it was right, and because I wanted to. Do not insult me by treating this like a business transaction." "Then what is it?" she asked, confused and flustered. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "I am not entirely sure yet," he finally said, "but it is not just business." Natalie's heart hammered in her chest. She knew she should step back, put some proper distance between them, but she could not seem to move. "Mr. Everett." "Xavier," he corrected gently. "I think we are past formal titles, do you not, Xavier?" she tried, liking the sound of his name. "I am grateful for what you did, more grateful than I can express, but I need to understand what you expect from me." "I expect nothing. But I would like permission to visit again when I am in the area. To see how you are doing, to talk with you." He paused. "Would that be acceptable?" Natalie knew she should be cautious. She knew nothing about this man beyond his intervention at the bank. For all she knew, he could have ulterior motives she did not understand. But looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine uncertainty there, she found herself wanting to know him better. "Yes," she said. "That would be acceptable. I would welcome it." The smile that crossed Xavier's face transformed it, softening the hard edges and making him seem younger, more open. "Good. Then I will come by when I can. I come into Laramie every few weeks for supplies and to check on business matters. I can make this a regular stop." They walked back to the ranch house together, and Natalie invited him in for coffee. Her home was simple, just 4 rooms in a sturdy log structure her father had built when he first claimed this land. But it was clean and comfortable, with her mother's curtains still hanging in the windows and her father's books lining a shelf in the main room. Xavier sat at the kitchen table, looking somewhat out of place in the domestic setting, his large frame making the simple furniture seem small. But he accepted the coffee gratefully and talked easily with both Natalie and Samuel when her brother joined them. "So you live up in the mountains by yourself?" Samuel asked, his earlier suspicion replaced by fascination. "What do you do up there?" "Trap mostly," Xavier said. "Beaver, fox, sometimes bear. I sell the pelts in Cheyenne or trade them for supplies. And I have some business investments that I check on periodically, which is why I deal with Pemberton despite finding him generally unpleasant." "Investments?" Natalie asked. "What kind?" "A little of everything. I guide hunting parties sometimes, wealthy folks from back east who want to experience the wilderness. I have stakes in a few mining operations, and I own some property in Cheyenne that I lease out, enough to keep me comfortable without having to trap year-round." "How did you end up living in the mountains?" Samuel asked. Xavier's expression grew more guarded. "Long story. The short version is I came west about 8 years ago, wanted to get away from cities and crowds, found I preferred living alone to dealing with most people's company." "Most people?" Natalie asked, catching the qualifier. "Some company is worth keeping," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her look away, flustered. Samuel glanced between them, a knowing smile playing at his lips. Natalie shot him a warning look, but her brother just grinned wider. Xavier stayed for another hour, then rose to leave. "I should get to town before the stores close. Thank you for the coffee and the conversation." Natalie walked him outside to his horse. In the yard, away from Samuel's curious eyes, Xavier paused before mounting. "Natalie," he said quietly, "I meant what I said. I will come back, if that is truly all right with you." "It is," she assured him. "More than all right." He nodded, then surprised her by taking her hand briefly, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. The touch lasted only a moment, but it sent warmth racing up her arm and through her whole body. "Until next time, then," he said, releasing her hand and swinging up into the saddle. She watched him ride away until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned to find Samuel watching from the doorway with an enormous grin on his face. "Do not start," she warned. "I did not say anything," Samuel protested innocently. "Just that our mysterious benefactor seems to have more than a charitable interest in checking on his investment. Samuel Jefferson, I swear." But her brother was already retreating into the house, laughing. And despite her protests, Natalie could not stop herself from smiling as she returned to her work. True to his word, Xavier returned 2 weeks later, and then again 3 weeks after that. The visits became a pattern, something Natalie found herself anticipating with increasing eagerness. He would arrive mid-morning, help with whatever work needed doing, then share a meal with her and Samuel before heading on to Laramie or back to his mountain home. On his 3rd visit, he brought fresh meat from a deer he had hunted, enough to fill their smokehouse for weeks. On the 4th, he helped Samuel repair part of the barn roof that had been leaking. He never mentioned the debt she owed him, never treated his help as something she needed to repay beyond simple gratitude. With each visit, Natalie learned more about him. He had grown up in Ohio, the son of a farmer who had lost everything to bad weather and worse loans. When he was 22, his parents had died within months of each other, leaving him with nothing but debts. He had come west to start over, tried his hand at various jobs, eventually finding his calling in the mountains where a man could live on his own terms. I spent years angry, he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Samuel had gone to bed, leaving them alone in the cooling air. Angry at the banks, at the people who could have helped my family but did not, at myself for not being able to save them. Living alone in the mountains, I found peace, or at least I thought I did. What changed? Natalie asked. I walked into that bank and saw you standing there, heard Harold laughing at you, and all that anger came back. But this time, I could do something about it. This time, I had the money and the power to make a difference. He turned to look at her, his face serious in the fading light. Helping you, it gave me something I had not felt in years, purpose beyond just existing. Natalie's throat tightened with emotion. You gave me back my life, my home, everything my father built. You were going to save it anyway, Xavier said. You would have found a way, I just made it easier. I am not sure I would have, Natalie admitted. I was close to giving up when you walked in. Another day, maybe two, and I might have accepted defeat. You are stronger than you think. Maybe now, but that is because you believed in me when no one else did. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Natalie was acutely aware of Xavier beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers, the warmth of his presence. Over the weeks of his visits, her initial gratitude had evolved into something deeper, more complicated. She found herself thinking about him constantly, anticipating his arrival, feeling bereft when he left. Natalie, Xavier said, breaking the silence, I need to tell you something. Her heart began to pound. What is it? These visits, spending time with you, it has become the best part of my weeks. More than that, you have become the best part of my life. He shifted to face her fully. I know I am not much, just a mountain man with rough manners and a simple life. But I am falling in love with you. Have been since I first saw you standing up to Pemberton, and I needed you to know. Natalie could barely breathe. The words she had been half hoping, half fearing to hear hung in the air between them. Xavier, You do not have to say anything, he said quickly. I know I am not the kind of man you probably imagined for yourself. I know my life is not easy or comfortable, but I wanted you to know how I feel, what my intentions are. What are your intentions? Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. To court you properly if you will have me, to see if what I feel, if what I hope we both feel, could become something permanent, something real. Natalie felt tears prickling at her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. You are wrong about one thing, she said. Xavier's face fell slightly. What is that? You said you are not much, but you are everything I could want. You are strong and kind and brave. You stood up for me when no one else would. You have helped me without expecting anything in return. You see me as capable and worthy, not as a burden or a problem to be solved. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. And I have been falling in love with you too, though I have been afraid to admit it even to myself. The joy that flooded Xavier's face was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. Truly, truly. I think I started falling that first day in the bank, and every time you have come here, every conversation, every shared moment, I have fallen deeper. Xavier raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently, his eyes never leaving hers. I will do everything I can to be worthy of that love, I swear it. You already are, Natalie said. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Natalie did not want to pull away. She closed the distance between them, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then deepened as Xavier's hand came up to cup her face, his touch reverent and careful despite the calluses on his palms. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I have 1,000 things I want to say to you." "We have time," Natalie assured him. "All the time we need." They sat together on that porch until the stars emerged in full glory overhead, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and simply enjoying being together. When Xavier finally rose to leave, riding back to town where he was staying at the hotel overnight, he kissed her once more at the door, a long, sweet kiss that left Natalie floating as she finally went to bed. Over the following weeks, Xavier's visits became even more frequent. He helped with the hard work of preparing for the cattle drive to Cheyenne, taught Samuel better techniques for roping and handling the stock, and spent every possible moment with Natalie. They talked about their pasts, their hopes for the future, learning the 1,000 small details that make up a life. Natalie learned that Xavier had a dry sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable, that he could quote Shakespeare despite his rough exterior, that he had a gift for woodworking, and had built most of the furniture in his mountain cabin himself. She learned that he was patient and thoughtful, that he listened more than he spoke, and that when he did speak, he meant every word. Xavier learned that Natalie was fiercely intelligent, that she had taught herself to read Latin from her father's books, that she loved thunderstorms and hated the taste of coffee, despite drinking it every morning. He learned that she was stubborn and proud, that asking for help did not come naturally to her, and that underneath her determination was a tender heart that had been hurt by loss but remained open to love. In late August, as the time approached to drive the cattle to market, Xavier made a proposal. "Let me help you with the drive. You and Samuel cannot handle 30 head alone, not all the way to Cheyenne." "We managed to get them this far," Natalie pointed out, but she knew he was right. The drive would take at least a week, maybe longer if they encountered bad weather or difficulties. 2 people would be stretched dangerously thin. "You managed because you are both tougher than old leather," Xavier said. "But that does not mean you should refuse help when it is offered. Let me come with you. I know the trail, I know the territory, and I can handle the stock. It will be safer and easier with 3 of us." Samuel, who had been listening from where he was mending tacks, spoke up. "He is right, Nat. We could use the help, and honestly, I would feel better having someone along who knows what they are doing." "I know what I am doing," Natalie protested. "You know ranching," Samuel agreed. "But Xavier knows the trail and the dangers. There is a difference." Outvoted and knowing they were right, Natalie agreed. The truth was she would welcome Xavier's presence on the journey, both for practical reasons and simply to spend more time with him. They set out on a clear September morning, the cattle in good condition and ready for the trek. The journey to Cheyenne was approximately 50 miles, following the railroad line that had come through a few years earlier. They pushed the herd at a steady pace, covering about 10 miles a day, letting the cattle graze and rest to maintain their weight. Xavier proved invaluable on the trail. He knew where the best water sources were, which routes to take to avoid difficult terrain, how to read the weather and anticipate trouble. When they encountered a small band of men on the second day, rough-looking characters who seemed interested in the cattle, Xavier's mere presence was enough to discourage any thoughts of theft. He sat his horse like a warrior, his hand resting casually near his knife, his eyes hard as flint, and the men moved on without incident. At night, they took turns keeping watch over the herd. On the third night, when it was Natalie's turn and Xavier's, they sat by the fire while Samuel slept and the cattle dozed peacefully in the darkness. "Tell me about your cabin," Natalie said, wrapped in a blanket against the cooling air. "You have mentioned it but never really described it." Xavier poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. It is nothing fancy. 2 rooms, one for living and one for sleeping. Stone fireplace I built myself, windows facing east to catch the sunrise. There is a stream about 50 yards away with good water and decent fishing. Meadow beyond that where deer come to graze. It is quiet and peaceful. Sometimes I can go weeks without seeing another human soul. Does it get lonely? It used to not bother me, but lately, yes, it has been getting lonely. He looked at her. Especially after I met you. Natalie shifted closer to him, their shoulders touching. What would you think about it being less lonely? On a permanent basis? Xavier's hand found hers under the blanket. Are you asking what I think you are asking? Maybe. If you were to consider a future that involved not living alone anymore, would that appeal to you? Natalie Jefferson, are you proposing to me? Xavier asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I think I might be. Unless you were planning to do it first, in which case I am terribly sorry for ruining your plans. Xavier laughed, the sound rich and warm in the darkness. My plan was to wait until after we sold the cattle, until you had your money and knew you were secure. I did not want you to feel obligated or think I expected anything because of the loan. The loan has nothing to do with how I feel about you, Natalie said firmly. I love you because of who you are, not because of what you did for me, though that is part of it, I suppose. But mostly I love you because being with you feels like the most natural thing in the world, because I trust you completely, because I can imagine spending my life with you, and that future makes me happy. Xavier turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the firelight. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. You have brought light and purpose back into my life. If you will have me, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that gift. So, is that a yes? Natalie asked. That is the biggest yes I have ever said to anything, Xavier confirmed. Then he kissed her, deep and passionate, his strong arms pulling her close against his broad chest. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. We should probably wait until we get back to make it official, Natalie said reluctantly. Tell Samuel properly, make plans. Probably, Xavier agreed. But unofficially, you are mine and I am yours from this moment forward. From this moment forward, Natalie echoed and kissed him again. The rest of the cattle drive passed smoothly. They reached Cheyenne on schedule and found the stockyards bustling with activity. The prices were as good as Natalie had hoped, even better actually, thanks to increased demand from the railroad bringing in more settlers. When the final tally was calculated, Natalie had cleared $1,300 after all expenses. It was more than enough to pay Xavier back with money left over for a comfortable winter and seed money for expanding the herd next year. That evening in a hotel in Cheyenne, Natalie sat at a table with Xavier and carefully counted out $800. Xavier tried to refuse it, but she was adamant. This was always a loan, not a gift, she said. I am paying you back as agreed. This is important to me, Xavier. I need to do this properly. He finally accepted the money, understanding that her pride and integrity required it. What will you do with what is left? Some goes to supplies for the winter. Some gets saved for emergencies. And some, she paused, then continued with a smile, goes toward planning a wedding if a certain mountain man is still interested in marrying me. That certain mountain man is very much still interested, Xavier assured her. More than interested. When did you want to have this wedding? Soon, Natalie said. I see no reason to wait, unless you need time to prepare. I have been preparing since the moment I met you, even if I did not know it then, Xavier said. As soon as we get back to Laramie would suit me fine. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Laramie. Samuel stood up for Natalie, and Xavier asked the hotel owner, a gruff but kindly man named George who had befriended him over his many stays in town, to stand for him. Natalie wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, the ivory satin still beautiful after 20 years. Xavier wore new clothes for the occasion, a proper suit that showed off his powerful build, his long hair trimmed somewhat but still touching his collar. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed Natalie with such tenderness and passion that several ladies in the small congregation fanned themselves, and Samuel made a show of covering his eyes. After the ceremony, they held a modest celebration at the hotel. Several townspeople attended, including, surprisingly, Harold Pemberton, who offered stiff congratulations and a gift of silver candlesticks. Xavier accepted them politely, but later told Natalie that Pemberton had probably attended out of curiosity and possibly regret for having underestimated her so badly. He likely realized he could have made a significant profit if he had just given you that extension, Xavier said. You proved him wrong about everything, and men like Harold hate being wrong. I do not care what Harold Pemberton thinks, Natalie said, wrapped in Xavier's arms in their hotel room that night, finally alone as husband and wife. I only care about this, about us. Xavier kissed her deeply, his hands gentle despite their strength as he held her close. My wife, he said wonderingly. I never thought I would say those words, never thought I would find someone who made me want to say them. And I never thought I would find someone who sees me as a partner, who respects my strength while still wanting to protect me, Natalie replied. You are everything I needed and things I did not know I wanted. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other in the most intimate way, declarations of love spoken and shown in equal measure. Afterward, lying in Xavier's arms, Natalie felt a contentment she had not known since before her father's death. She had feared she might never feel truly safe and happy again, but Xavier had given her both. The next morning, they had decisions to make about their future. Samuel could manage the ranch through the winter with occasional hired help. The question was where Xavier and Natalie would live. I love your cabin, Natalie said over breakfast. From how you have described it, it sounds like paradise, but the ranch is my father's legacy. I am not ready to give it up entirely. I would never ask you to, Xavier said. What if we split our time? Winters at the cabin, which is easier to manage and more comfortable in the deep snow. Summers at the ranch, helping Samuel with the stock and the work there. We could make both places our home. It was a perfect compromise. Samuel was delighted with the arrangement, eager to prove he could manage the ranch independently for months at a time. And Natalie found she was excited to see Xavier's mountain cabin, to experience the wilderness life he loved. They spent 2 weeks helping Samuel prepare for winter, stocking the ranch with supplies, making repairs, and ensuring everything was secure. Then, in mid-October, Xavier and Natalie rode north into the mountains toward his cabin. The journey took them through some of the most beautiful country Natalie had ever seen. Aspen trees blazed gold and orange, contrasting with the deep green of pine forests. They followed a winding trail that climbed steadily, the air growing crisper and cleaner as they gained elevation. On the afternoon of the second day, they emerged into a clearing, and Natalie saw the cabin for the first time. It was exactly as Xavier had described, a solid structure of weathered logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. But seeing it in person, with the mountains rising dramatically behind it and the stream gurgling nearby, she fell in love with it immediately. Welcome home, Xavier said, helping her down from her horse. It is perfect, Natalie breathed, taking it all in. Absolutely perfect. Over the following weeks, they settled into a rhythm of life in the mountains. Xavier taught Natalie how to set trap lines, how to read animal signs, how to move quietly through the forest. They worked together to winterize the cabin, banking dirt around the foundation and securing extra firewood. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking or reading or simply being together. Xavier proved to be remarkably well-read, his shelves containing not just practical manuals but poetry, philosophy, and history. They would take turns reading aloud to each other, or Natalie would work on sewing while Xavier carved wood, creating small figures of astonishing detail. "Where did you learn to do that?" Natalie asked one evening, watching him transform a block of pine into a detailed wolf. "Taught myself, mostly," Xavier said, his knife moving with practiced ease. "When you live alone, you need hobbies or you go mad. This kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. You will have to find a new excuse now that you are not alone anymore." "I think I will keep doing it anyway," Xavier said, smiling at her. "Though now I have better reasons to create things." He held up the finished wolf, remarkably lifelike. "This one is for you." Natalie took the carving, marveling at the detail, the way he had captured the animal's wild spirit in wood. "It is beautiful, thank you." "The wolf reminded me of you," Xavier said. "Beautiful, fierce, and free. Never let anyone cage that spirit, Natalie, not even me." "You are the only person who has never tried to cage it," Natalie replied. "That is one of the many reasons I love you." Their first winter in the mountains was magical despite its hardships. Snow came early and stayed late, sometimes piling so high they could not open the door and had to dig themselves out. But the cabin stayed warm and cozy, and they never lacked for food or comfort. Xavier proved to be a skilled hunter, keeping them supplied with fresh meat. Natalie learned to prepare venison and elk in a dozen different ways, to make soap from wood ash and animal fat, to tan hides for clothing and blankets. She discovered she had a knack for living this simpler but more demanding life. On the coldest nights, they would lie together under piles of furs, talking about their hopes for the future. They both wanted children, though they agreed to wait a year or two, to enjoy being newlyweds and ensure their finances were fully stable first. "I want to give our children the security I never had," Xavier said, "to know they will never lose their home the way my family did." "They will have that," Natalie assured him. "Between the ranch and your business interests, we are building something solid, something that will last." When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and opening the mountain passes, they made the journey back to the ranch. Samuel greeted them enthusiastically, eager to share all that had happened over the winter. He had managed well, losing only 2 head of cattle and actually improving several of the outbuildings. "I was thinking," Samuel said over dinner their first night back, "that maybe we should expand. The range can support more cattle, and with the railroad making shipping easier, there is good money to be made." Xavier and Natalie exchanged glances. "What are you proposing?" Xavier asked. "I want to buy into the operation," Samuel said. "Become a real partner, not just your little brother who helps out. I have some money saved from odd jobs over the winter. Not much, but enough to purchase a stake. We could expand the herd, maybe buy some of the adjoining land that is available." Natalie felt a surge of pride in her brother. He had grown so much over the past year, from a grieving boy to a man with vision and ambition. "I think that is an excellent idea. Xavier, what do you think?" "I think your brother has a good head for business," Xavier said. "And I think making him a real partner is not only fair but smart. You will need someone here managing things while we split our time between the ranch and the cabin. This gives Samuel both responsibility and incentive." They worked out the details over the following weeks, making Samuel a third partner in the ranch operation. With Xavier's business acumen and Natalie's knowledge of the property, combined with Samuel's youthful energy and new ideas, the ranch began to truly thrive. Over the following years, they developed a comfortable pattern. Winters in the mountain cabin, springs and summers at the ranch, autumns moving between the two as needed. Xavier continued his trapping and guiding work, which brought in steady income, while the ranch grew from 30 head of cattle to over 100. In their third year of marriage, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The news brought joy mixed with apprehension, as the nearest doctor was in Laramie, hours away from the mountain cabin where they had been staying. Xavier immediately suggested they spend the remainder of the pregnancy at the ranch, closer to medical help, but Natalie surprised him by refusing. "I want our child to be born in the cabin," she said. "In the place where we fell in love with being married, where we built our life together. There are women in the settlements who know midwifery. We will be fine." Xavier worried, but he understood her desire. They compromised by making sure they had a skilled midwife located and on call before Natalie was too far along to travel easily. In early March, on a snowy morning that felt appropriate for their mountain home, Natalie went into labor. Xavier proved surprisingly calm and capable, having helped with difficult animal births often enough that he understood the basic process, though he admitted later that helping his wife through childbirth was far more terrifying than anything he had ever experienced. "I would rather face a charging bear than see you in that much pain again," he told Natalie after, though he was grinning as he said it, exhausted and elated in equal measure. Their son was born healthy and strong, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined chin. They named him Thomas, after Natalie's father, and Xavier carved him a cradle from pine that was a work of art. Samuel rode up from the ranch as soon as the passes cleared enough to travel, bringing supplies and eager to meet his nephew. The look on his face when he held Thomas for the first time brought tears to Natalie's eyes. "He looks like father," Samuel said quietly. "Around the eyes." "I thought so too," Natalie agreed. "I think father would have loved being a grandfather." "He would have been terrible at it," Samuel said with a grin. "Would have spoiled the boy rotten and taught him bad habits." "Then I suppose that duty falls to you now," Xavier said, clapping Samuel on the shoulder. "Someone needs to corrupt our son, might as well be his uncle." Thomas thrived in the mountain air, a happy baby who seemed to enjoy the quiet of their cabin life. Natalie discovered that motherhood came naturally to her, though it was far more demanding than she had anticipated. Xavier was a devoted father, spending hours holding his son, telling him stories, and showing him the wonders of the mountain world around them. When Thomas was 6 months old, they returned to the ranch for the summer. The property had expanded significantly under Samuel's management, now encompassing 500 acres and supporting over 150 head of cattle. Samuel had even taken on a hired hand, a young man named Peter who proved hardworking and reliable. "I have been thinking about building a proper house," Samuel announced one evening. "The cabin is fine for me alone, but if I am ever going to find a wife, I need something better to offer." "Oh," Natalie asked with interest. "Is there someone in particular you are thinking of?" Samuel's ears turned red. "Maybe. There is a girl in town, Emma Whitfield. Her father owns the dry goods store. We have been talking some." Xavier grinned. "Just talking. A gentleman does not kiss and tell," Samuel said with dignity, which was as good as a confirmation. Over the following months, Samuel did indeed court Emma Whitfield, a sensible young woman with a quick wit and a good head for business. Natalie approved immediately, and even Thomas seemed to like her, cooing and smiling whenever Emma held him. Samuel and Emma were married the following spring in a ceremony much larger than Xavier and Natalie's had been, as Emma's family was well connected in Laramie. The new couple moved into the house Samuel had built, and Emma proved to be an excellent addition to the ranch operation, handling the books with skill that freed Samuel to focus on the cattle and land management. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to an energetic boy who loved both the ranch and the mountain cabin. When he was 3, Natalie became pregnant again, giving birth to a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's wild spirit. The ranch continued to prosper. Xavier's business investments paid off handsomely, and they were able to purchase additional land and improve their stock with quality bulls that produced better calves. Samuel and Emma had children of their own, twin girls who were only a year younger than Rose, creating a lively household of cousins who grew up more like siblings. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, showing aptitude for both ranch work and the wilderness skills Xavier taught him. Rose proved to be fearless, climbing trees and riding horses almost before she could walk properly, keeping her parents constantly on their toes. When Thomas was 12, Xavier began taking him on longer trips into the mountains, teaching him everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness. These trips became sacred time for father and son, building a bond that grew deeper with each passing year. "You have given me a life I never dreamed possible," Xavier told Natalie one evening watching Thomas and Rose play with their cousins in the ranch yard. "A family, a home, purpose and love beyond measure." "We gave each other that life," Natalie corrected. "You walked into that bank and saw me when I felt invisible. You believed in me when no one else did. Everything we have built started with that single act of kindness." "Not kindness," Xavier said, pulling her close. "It was recognition. I saw myself in you, saw someone fighting against circumstances beyond their control and refusing to give up. How could I not help?" "Whatever it was, I am grateful every day," Natalie said, resting her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "For you, for our children, for this life we have created together." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "As am I, my love, as am I." On their 15th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Natalie with a gift that made her cry. It was a leather-bound book, hand-crafted, filled with detailed drawings and notes about every important moment of their life together. The day they met, sketched in careful detail. Their wedding day. The births of their children. The ranch as it had been and as it had become. All documented in Xavier's precise hand, illustrated with his remarkable artistic skill. "I started this the day we married," Xavier explained. "I wanted to capture everything, to make sure nothing was forgotten, our story, from that moment in the bank to every day since." Natalie paged through it with wonder, seeing their life illustrated, preserved in ink and paper. "This is the most precious thing anyone has ever given me." "You gave me a reason to create it," Xavier said. "You gave me a story worth recording." As their children grew into young adults, Thomas expressed interest in following in his father's footsteps, spending more time in the mountains and considering starting his own guiding business. Rose, ever practical, wanted to study medicine, inspired by the frontier doctor who had cared for the family over the years. They supported both children in their ambitions, though Xavier admitted to Natalie that the thought of Rose in medical school back east made him anxious. "She will come back," Natalie assured him. "This land is in her blood just as much as it is in ours. She wants to learn so she can help people here in places where doctors are scarce." Xavier knew she was right. And when Rose left for school in Philadelphia at 18, She promised to return within 4 years, which she did, bringing with her both a medical degree and an earnest young doctor named James, who had fallen in love with both Rose and her descriptions of Wyoming. Thomas, meanwhile, had indeed started a guiding business, working seasonally and proving even more skilled than his father at navigating clients through the wilderness. He met and married a schoolteacher named Sarah, who had come west for adventure, and found it in the capable hands of a mountain man's son. Samuel and Emma's twins also married and started families of their own, choosing to stay on the ranch, which had now expanded to encompass over 1,000 acres and supported 300 head of prime cattle. The Jefferson Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the territory, respected throughout Wyoming for quality stock and honest dealings. Through it all, Xavier and Natalie remained the foundation of the family, their love for each other deepening with each passing year. They still split their time between the mountain cabin and the ranch, though as they aged, they spent slightly more time at lower elevations where winters were less harsh. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and more family than either had ever imagined having, Xavier raised a glass in toast. 30 years ago, I walked into a bank expecting a simple business transaction. Instead, I found my purpose, my heart, my everything. Natalie, you have made me happier than I deserve and loved me better than I could have hoped. Here is to 30 more years together. To 30 more, Natalie echoed, her eyes shining with tears of joy. And to the day you decided a stubborn woman was worth fighting for. You have always been worth fighting for, Xavier said, kissing her to the applause and cheers of their family. The story could have ended there, with the warm glow of anniversary celebration and a family well established. But life continued, bringing both joys and challenges that tested and strengthened the bonds they had built. When Xavier was 65, he began to slow down, his years in the harsh mountain winters catching up with him. His hands, so strong and capable, began to ache with arthritis. Natalie, seeing him struggle, gently suggested it might be time to spend less time in the cabin and more at the ranch. Xavier resisted at first. The cabin was where he felt most himself, where he and Natalie had built their private world away from the rest of civilization. But practical considerations won out. They were grandparents now, with responsibilities to family. And truthfully, climbing mountain trails in deep snow had lost some of its appeal. They compromised, as they always had, spending summers in the cabin when the weather was mild and winters at the ranch where help was available if needed. Thomas had actually built them a small house on the property, separate from the main ranch buildings, giving them privacy while keeping them close to family. In their later years, Natalie and Xavier became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family empire. The ranch was now run primarily by Samuel's and Emma's children, with Thomas's family involved in the guiding business that had grown to include hunting expeditions, photography tours, and wilderness survival training. Rose and her husband James ran a medical practice in Laramie, but spent weekends at the ranch, treating the family and nearby settlers who could not afford city doctors. Through it all, the love between Xavier and Natalie remained constant. They still held hands while walking, still found reasons to steal kisses when they thought no one was watching, still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection that had marked their early days together. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked one evening, sitting on the porch of their small house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Tying yourself to a rough mountain man instead of finding someone more refined," Natalie laughed, the sound still bright despite the years that had passed. Refined men do not walk into banks and upend their lives for strangers. Refined men do not see past surfaces to recognize strength and determination. Refined men would have let me lose everything and never thought twice about it. She squeezed his hand, gnarled now with age but still strong. I have never regretted a single moment with you, Xavier Everett. Not one. Not even when I tracked mud through the cabin after promising I would leave my boots outside. Well, maybe that once, Natalie conceded, smiling. But even then, I loved you too much to stay angry. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of shared life. In the distance, they could see their great-grandchildren playing, the newest generation of a family that had started with a desperate plea in a bank and a mountain man who decided to intervene. "We built something good," Xavier said quietly, "better than I ever imagined possible." "We built something lasting," Natalie agreed. "Not just the ranch or the businesses, but a family, a legacy, children and grandchildren who know they are loved, who have security we fought to give them." "Because you would not give up," Xavier said. "Because you stood in that bank and demanded what was rightfully yours, even when that pompous fool laughed at you." "And because you believed I deserved it," Natalie countered. "Because you saw worth in me when I was close to believing I had none." Xavier turned to look at her, this woman who had been his wife for over 3 decades, whose face showed the lines of years and laughter, whose eyes still sparkled with intelligence and humor and love. "I fell in love with you the moment I saw you standing up to Pemberton. Did I ever tell you that?" "Many times," Natalie said, "but I never tire of hearing it. I saw this fierce woman refusing to back down, and I thought, there is someone worth knowing, someone special, and I have spent every day since then grateful that you let me into your life." "Let you?" Natalie laughed. "Xavier, you saved my life. Not just my ranch or my finances, but my actual life. I was drowning and you threw me a rope. Of course I was going to hold on." "We saved each other," Xavier said. "I was existing, not living, before I met you. Going through the motions of life without any real purpose or joy. You gave me reasons to get up in the morning beyond mere survival. You gave me love, family, belonging. Things I had convinced myself I did not need because I was afraid I could never have them." They talked until the stars emerged, reminiscing about their years together, the struggles and triumphs, the ordinary moments that had woven together into an extraordinary life. When they finally went inside, Xavier helped Natalie up from her chair, their movements slower now but no less tender. In their bedroom, decorated with photographs of their family and Xavier's carved figures displayed on every surface, they prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage. "I love you," Xavier said, as he did every night, holding Natalie close as they lay in the darkness. "I love you too," Natalie replied, as she always did, her head resting on his shoulder. "Today, tomorrow, and always." Xavier Everett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72 with Natalie at his side. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Wyoming, a testament to the impact he had made on people's lives through his quiet kindness and steadfast integrity. Natalie grieved deeply, feeling the loss of her partner and best friend like a physical wound. But she was surrounded by family who loved her, supported by the legacy they had built together, and comforted by the knowledge that she had been blessed with a love story for the ages. She lived another 8 years, spending her time with children and grandchildren, writing down stories of Xavier and their life together so future generations would know the remarkable man who had changed everything with a single act of courage and compassion in a bank in Laramie. On a spring morning, Natalie passed away quietly in her sleep, and the family buried her beside Xavier on a hill overlooking both the ranch and the distant mountains where his cabin still stood. On the shared headstone, They carved a simple inscription that captured the essence of their story. She needed help. He made sure she got everything. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued under family management for generations, never forgetting the two people who had founded it through determination, courage, and love. The mountain cabin was preserved as a family retreat, kept exactly as Xavier and Natalie had left it, a shrine to their love and the life they had built. And every year, on the anniversary of that day when Xavier walked into the bank and changed two lives forever, the family would gather to share stories and raise toasts to the couple who had proven that sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to change everything. That true love is built on respect, partnership, and the willingness to fight for what matters. That the best legacies are not measured in land or money but in the lives touched and the love shared. The story of the banker who laughed and the mountain man who made sure she got everything became legend in Laramie, passed down through generations as an example of true courage, genuine love, and the power of standing up for what is right. It inspired countless others to look beyond surfaces, to offer help when they could, to believe in people who deserved a chance, even when the world said they did not. But for those who knew them, for the family they created and the lives they touched directly, Xavier and Natalie's story was simply about two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who built a life together based on mutual respect and deep love, and who proved that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest acts of courage and compassion. Their love story did not end with death, but continued in every child who learned to value strength and kindness, in every family gathering where their story was told, in every sunrise over the mountains, and every sunset over the ranch lands they had protected and grown. They lived on in the values they had instilled, the example they had set, and the enduring proof that true love, honestly earned and faithfully tended, can create ripples that extend far beyond two individual lives to touch everyone around them. And so, in the end, what began with a desperate woman facing down a dismissive banker and a mountain man who decided to intervene became a story of hope, love, and the extraordinary things that become possible when two people commit to building something together, supporting each other through every challenge, and never losing sight of what truly matters in life.